Before Don Bentley could write it, he had to live it. As an Army Apache helicopter pilot deployed in Afghanistan, he was awarded a Bronze Star and the Air Medal with V device for valor. After leaving the military, Don worked as an FBI special agent, running sources during foreign intelligence and counterintelligence operations. Later, Don was a Special Weapons and Tactics team member, SWAT. It was these experiences that formed the foundation for what would become his blistering debut novel, Without Sanction. An operation gone wrong, the delicate relationship between a handler and his source. Don's real-world experiences infuse every page with an authenticity that few authors can match. Couple that with his considerable writing skills, and you have the recipe for a debut that has everyone in the genre talking. The Crew Review is going to welcome Don Bentley to the show. Yeah, boys, let's raise a glass.
That's what we do around here. There you go. Oh, he's got White Claw.
No, I got a double archipelago from Frank M. From viewer Frank M. Who's
Frank. Thank you so much, pal.
Nice. Super cool.
Nice.
So it's Don Bentley, not Don Bentley.
Right. Want to get this straight, people.
Yeah, Matt and I are one letter removed, I think.
One letter. So brother, your debut novel, Without Sanction, it hits shelves March 3rd, which is a fantastic day because it's also my father's birthday. So really cool day. Without Sanction, it's the first in a series featuring
that's right.
awesome protagonist Matt Drake.
Yep.
So Don, would you mind giving us and the audience a 30,000-foot view, since you're a pilot, of what we can expect in this awesome novel?
Sure. Well, first off, I am a pilot, but as a helicopter guy, if I was ever at 30,000 feet,
something's wrong.
I didn't say you were a good helicopter pilot.
In the Army trying to fly Airwolf, and it never happened.
You loved Airwolf.
I loved Airwolf. I can still do the theme song. I love it.
Do it right now before you answer my question. Do it.
Yeah, boy.
Yeah.
I'm fired up for this.
Nice. Dude, you're doing Jack Carr proud there.
Do a little end better than Jan Michael Vincent did for us, okay? Just walk the straight and narrow.
I watched that again later on Netflix. I went through a thing where I was introducing my kids to 80s shows, and we watched the A-Team. He does a lot of brooding in Airwolf. Like, there's a lot of staring into and playing his cello and a hawk flying through. I didn't remember that when I was 12.
I don't remember that either.
Wow. Just ruined it for me.
So what was the question?
30,000-foot view, your book.
Yes, 30,000-foot view of my book. So Without Sanction, to write this book, kind of a couple different things came together. So first off, I wrote 3 books that did not sell. And each time I wrote a new book, I hopefully got a little better on my craft and tried to figure out what to do differently on the next book, which, as you guys know, is really like writing's probably the only profession in the world where it's like you're a carpenter and you build somebody a chest of drawers and you deliver it to them and they just hand you a form note back that says "not for me," and then you're done. So
it took a year
trying to figure out, why is this not for you? Why don't you love my chest of drawers?
Yeah.
And so the 3 books in 17 years that it took me, and when I got serious about my writing, to get without sanction, I tried to get a lot better at my craft and read things and figure out how to become a better writer, and more specifically, how to be a writer in the military thriller genre, espionage thriller genre. And so somebody really smart, I can't remember who said this, said that if you want to write in a genre, you need to bring something that is the same but different to that genre. And so what they meant by that is the same so that it fits within the conventions of the genre, but different so that there's something unique about your book or your work that kind of sets it apart. And so when I went to write Without Sanction, one of the huge influences on my writing is Nelson DeMille, and specifically his John Corey series, where he has that super witty first-person protagonist. And I remember when I had written my second book that didn't sell, I was rereading some of his stuff, and I said to my wife, I was like, you know what, I would go to the freaking grocery store with John Corey just to hear him talk. And so I was like, I think I'm going to try and do that. And so my third book was the first one that was kind of Matt's voice that I took some time to get to and kind of discover him as a character. And that one didn't sell, but it gave me 95,000 words of trying to figure out Matt's voice and what that would look like. And so for my fourth book, I deliberately went with that kind of voice and that POV character, because other than Nelson DeMille, and then Brad Taylor obviously also writes in first person POV, not a whole lot of folks do that. And so I kind of made that deliberate choice. The second thing I did is I was an FBI agent, and my first gig, if you will, with the FBI was to run and recruit what we call sources and what folks in the intelligence community call assets. And so a lot of the folks who write in this genre, the protagonists are military special operations guys, assassins who work for the agency, stuff like that. There aren't a whole lot of folks who are case officers, and that's the word that the intelligence community uses for somebody whose job is to run and recruit sources. And so I really liked it when I was in the FBI, and I got to rub shoulders with some other agencies. And I thought, you know what, I want my guy to be a case officer, and I want to pick an agency that not a lot of folks know about, that's a little different. So I took that again and purposely chose DIA, the Defense Intelligence Agency, because they have a very, very similar mission to the CIA, and their case officers also go to the farm. But there's a good amount of built-in conflict there, because folks from the CIA look at the DIA as people who have a duplicative mission, who's stealing funding for them, and do we really need another organization? And folks from the DIA a lot of times come from military backgrounds where they were military officers or such before. And I thought that would be an interesting way, because my protagonist was a Ranger, to be able to work some of that cool special operations stuff without him being another one of what Brad writes or what Vince Flynn writes or Brad Thor or anybody else like that. And so I kind of made that choice as well. And then I've been very fortunate in that after I left the FBI, for the last 9 or 10 years, I've worked at companies whose job was to market and produce technology for SOCOM specifically. And so my coworkers were all guys from the Ranger Regiment, from this special operations community. And so I got to kind of vicariously understand what people from that community thought, how they acted, things that were important to them. And I kind of grabbed that too and pulled it in. And then the final part that made Without Sanction the book I wanted to write is somebody else really smart, and I should probably pay attention to who these smart people are, said that in a really good novel, what a writer's trying to do is answer a question for themselves on the pages of that novel, right? Mm-hmm. And so when I was in Afghanistan, I was the air mission commander for an operation that went tragically wrong. And I spent a lot of time, as people in law enforcement sometimes do, as people in the military sometimes do, thinking about this thing that went tragically wrong and saying, what could I have done differently? And that's the first part. And the second part that you really don't articulate, but you feel just as strongly, is what if I could somehow atone for that? What if I could, because I know I can't get that moment in time back, but what if there was a way that I could do something just as important as that, but it turned out differently this time? And so taking that together is what I did to set up Matt's initial setting, where he was a case officer for the DIA. He ran an asset and it went wrong, and the asset's family was killed, and he's kind of suffering for that. And all of a sudden he gets this opportunity to perhaps atone for that. But what it would mean is he has to go back and kind of face his biggest failure again and see if things will turn out differently this time. So
that's great motivation.
1,000 foot.
Dude, so it's like the 10,000 foot view, I think.
None of this.
I don't.
Well, what's cool to know is that your success, and we can pretty much guarantee your success with this book, was not an accident. It was all hard work. It was
Yeah.
So
awesome.
let's talk about that, the pre-success. So Don, Without Sanction is receiving enormous, and having read the book, very well-deserved early praise. You're in a spot all aspiring writers like the four of us.
Yep.
I guess we're not aspiring writers. We're writers. We're just aspiring for careers. We're dying to be in. But the road to traditionally published novels is not for the faint of heart.
Yeah.
Tell us some of the things that were either good or bad that you didn't expect, whether it's the rewrite process, contract negotiations.
So that's a great question. And it's funny, you know, we all, I think Twitter and Facebook are awesome things. I know I was watching Brad Taylor, and he's like, it's the devil. And I think it's awesome from the standpoint of it lets you connect with communities of folks like yourselves, and you can watch people kind of progress in their career, right? But what you typically don't see is what happens before they announce that book deal, right? You see somebody bursts onto Twitter and is like, here's my 3-book deal for $1 gazillion. And you're like, man, when is that ever going to be me? And I think for me, like I said, it was 17 years of trying to get better at my craft, 3 books that didn't sell, 2 agents I parted ways with, an MFA that I went and got better at. But I think one of the biggest things that I wasn't expecting that was instrumental in my career is things like Thriller Fest. And so, you know, I'd gone to Thriller Fest for the last 5 or 6 years. And when you're in that process of writing, it can be a double-edged sword, right? Because you're trying to explain to somebody, like you said, Sean, I really am a writer. It just hasn't happened yet. You know, I really am a writer. It just hasn't happened yet. And you go back year after year, and they're like, so how are you doing this year? And you're like, I really am a writer, but it still hasn't happened yet. And it's like, once you get past that, if you can, for me, honestly, part of it was swallowing my pride and being willing to say that again and again. People are so gracious that you can buy incredibly successful writers a beer and ask them questions, and they'll tell you, here's how it went for me. Here are the things that you should look at. Here's what it means to have a good agent versus a not so good agent. Here's what it means. Here's what your relationship with your editor. Here's some things you want to think about. And then when you form those relationships, it can go beyond that, where my agent, Barbara Powell, is also Nick Petrie's agent. And so when I was at a particularly low point in my writing career, my 3rd book had just not only not sold, but I didn't even get an agent for it. And I pitched it at Thriller Fest, and I was like, what in the world am I even doing? And so Barbara introduced me to Nick, and The Drifter, the first one in his Peter Ash series, I think had just come out, and his second one was about to, or something like that. And it was supposed to be like a 10-minute conversation, and an hour and a half later, we're still standing there talking. And finally I got to the point, and I was like, all right, dude, check it out. I've written 3 books that didn't sell. I'm working on something now. I don't even know if I'm wasting my time with this. I don't have any hobbies. My family rarely sees me. I'm working on this thing. I don't know if it's ever going to happen. And he literally he grabbed a hold of me, and he's like, you are me 2 years ago. And he's like, I had 3 books that didn't sell. I was exactly where you are. And he's like, you are me. Don't quit. And I went back and finished that novel. And that's the one that became Without Sanction. And I think he didn't say anything magical that my wife hadn't said, that my friends hadn't said. But the fact that he had walked that path and had been there, you know, it gave his words kind of a veracity or a power for me that a whole bunch of other people who had said the same thing didn't. And the only way you have those relationships are things like Thriller Fest or BoucherCon or stuff like that. And so when I've had people ask me before, like I went to an awesome program to get my MFA, and I was able to do it because I had the GI Bill and they paid for it. And I've had folks come and say, like, do I need an MFA? And I say that as a writer, you have to understand some very basic things about your craft, right? Like, what are the elements of a novel? What's the structure for that? How do I actually do the mechanics of writing? But you can learn that. I took a bunch of classes from Writer's Digest online when I started getting serious about writing. And my writing, I think, improved exponentially after that. But when people ask me, they're like, hey, should I spend money to do this or not? I'd say, like, honestly, if you have this amount of money and you could spend it going to conferences like Thriller Fest, or you could spend it getting an MFA, I would go to conferences like Thriller Fest every day of the week, because you're going to meet with the people who are in the community that you want to join. And the last thing I'll say on that, going back to Twitter being the devil, is that Tom I followed him on Twitter before Barbara ever submitted to him, and we had somewhat of a relationship. And so when she sent Without Sanction over, I talked to him on Twitter and said, hey, blah, blah, blah. She just sent me this book. And he's like, yep, I'll get to it. I see it's there. And he was kind enough to grab it and read it while he was on vacation. Like it was
That's
his
insane.
whatever, anniversary that he was taking his wife to Europe, and he read the book on vacation. And some of that, I think, was because we already had a relationship, and we had a relationship where we'd interacted on stuff that had nothing to do with me trying to plug a book, and everything to do with me being a fan of his authors and this genre. And from that standpoint, I think Twitter and I think the writing conferences and stuff can be incredibly helpful.
Great.
Can I just say something? Because we spoke to Nick Petrie a little bit ago, and I love his books. I actually had never read his books before. Actually, Sean got me into reading him, and so I love his books. And we talked to him. I'm like, he's such a cool guy, and now he's even cooler.
And the thing about the geek out from a writer's perspective, like Nick is one of those rare dudes who can tell a compelling story with beautiful language. Like when you read his stuff, some of his, you can tell that dude is a wordsmith. Like he understands how sentences should work, how description, and a lot of times there's one or the other, right? Like stereotypical literary stuff, maybe folks are really good at that. Maybe stereotypical genre, you're super good at plot, but not as good. And he can bring those two things together in a way very few writers can.
Agree.
Yeah.
Totally agree, man.
I'll have to learn. When you started this whole thing, the military thriller genre in itself is just stacked. And we know the names, right? We're personal friends with a lot of these guys that pump out some amazing stuff. So during this process, when you're really honing yourself to someone that can really pump out a great product, was there an intimidation level saying, is there room for another one of these guys? Or am I going to, how do I differentiate like you'd already talked about?
No, absolutely. And I think one of the hardest choices as a writer is to figure out what genre you're going to write in. And so for me, I was probably 12 or 13 when my neighbor gave me my first, or lent me one of his Tom Clancy books, the first one.
That's it.
And I remember reading that, and it's the first time that you read something and it's like you can't believe it's not real. Like when you talk to it, you talk to your friends about it. I remember talking to my dad and telling him the storyline as if it was, a news article or something instead of a book, because it was so real to me. And so that's when I fell in love with the genre. But I also I read a lot of fantasy. The first novel I ever tried to write was kind of a fantasy book. When I was in grad school, what they would do every semester is you would bring a writing sample with you every time you came. And I wrote a lot of different genres to try things out. Like I did some urban fantasy, I did some other things. And when when the third book didn't sell, was probably one of my darkest periods. And for a while I didn't write at all. And then I just said, you know what? I thought about writing a fantasy book. Let me write some scenes for that. And there was something funny I'd written for my MFA that was about a bunch, more of a middle grade or a YA. And I was like, let me try some of that. And eventually, you have to, in my opinion, the genre has to resonate with you, and it has to be somewhat of a commercial decision, right? Because you're
Sure.
writing to the aspects of that genre that sell, and you can't. I've seen people do work for hire that says, hey, write this book in this genre they don't care about, and a very good friend of mine did it, and it was a miserable experience for them. And they're like, I thought I was a writer and I could write anything, but this isn't a genre I normally read. And it was just drudgery. And that's another example, like living vicariously through your fellow writers who are farther along on the craft than you. But it was all kinds of intimidating to write in this genre. And you have, people from Brad Thor and Kyle Mills who have been doing it forever to, Brad Taylor and Mark Graney and Matt Bentley and everybody in between who is knocking it out of the park. And you're like, is there room for me? But then, kind of what I came back to is I've got this compelling story to tell, and this is the only genre where it makes sense to tell it, And so it was a super scary decision, but at the same time, when I took that block of time and gave myself permission to try whatever it was in the world I want to try, this is the character I kept coming back to, and this is the genre. And I was like, I got to try it again.
Yeah.
And so I guess that's how it worked for me. But I don't know, man. That's a great question.
Yeah. It just seems like it's just stacked up and down, but
yeah, but it's a story, like it's a story you have to tell. It's not just you want to tell it, you have to tell
You're
it.
compelled.
Like it's stuck in your head, it's got to come out.
The other thing about a stacked genre, though, is it's stacked for a reason. There's an appetite for this kind of story that seems to be insatiable. And I know it is for me. I'm like, I read in this genre more than any other, but like, I love the fact that there's an extreme amount of variety within this genre. And, but I'll never get tired of reading this kind of story. I think it's very, it's almost part of the human nature, this type of story is in our DNA. And I think it's been around forever, and I think it will continue to be around.
Well, the Brad Taylors, the Kyle Mills, the Brad Thors, everyone, they're only going to write one book a year. And readers are not going to read just 3 or 4 books a year. They're going to read a book, 30 or 40 of them, some of them. So
that's a great point. And that was the other thing I was going to say is I've gotten to become pretty good friends with Chris Howdy that did the Deep State book.
Great guy.
And he's a great guy. And he keeps contrasting how different this community is than writing screenplays. And Sean, obviously, I know you have experience with that too, is that, in screenplays, though I'm paraphrasing what he said, is that everybody is so cutthroat because there's only so many movies that are going to be made. And if it's yours, it's not theirs, where I feel like this community is the opposite of that. Everybody cheers everybody else's success, that it's not so much that there's a pie and only so many slices to get cut out, is that if I go into a bookstore and pick up a Matt Bentley book or a Nick Petrie or a Brad Taylor, I'm probably not going to just pick up one book, right? I'm going to pick up 2 or 3, and these readers are voracious readers, like what Eric said. They're going to read it in a week and want something else. And maybe they read Brad and they come to me, or vice versa. And I think it's such a different attitude shift than how Chris described his previous role. And I think that works. And the fact that, the people here genuinely want you to succeed. Like the amount of good things for me that people like Mark Graney was nice enough to provide a blurb. And when he was on his last book tour, somebody asked him what he was reading and he mentioned my book. And there are things like that just floor you, that people do, like acts of kindness in this genre all the time without ever thinking twice about it. All the time.
So
absolutely
awesome. That's been our experience in talking to, we've talked to, 24 bestsellers, like awesome writers, and they're literally awesome. They're such good people. They're such good people, willing to do this or do that. But not for anything, there's no tit for tat, you do this for me, no quid pro quo. It's just because they're
paying it forward.
Yeah.
And that's what, again, I feel like I keep preaching Thriller Fest, but Kim Howell has done such a great job with that conference, where you have people like Lee Child, who does not walk around with handlers, that bumps into people who will talk, and the amount of books that dude blurbs for all kinds of writers. And so you think to yourself, somebody asks you for a blurb or do whatever, and you're like, well, I'm kind of busy. And then you think, well, I bet Lee Child's kind of freaking busy too, but he made And it's like, or if anybody's starting to be successful and they, you get a little too big for your britches, and you're like, there's Lee Child. He's standing over there just talking to people. How cool do you think you're Lee Child cool? David Morrell does the same thing, or Gail Lynch, or all these people, right? I mean, they are the founders for it, Steve Barry, and they set the tone for this organization that says, you can come here and learn and talk to people who are the masters of their craft, and nobody's going to be pretentious about it. I mean, I don't know where else in the world you get to do that.
I haven't found it.
Well, and you're getting to pass that on, Don, with just the advice, sharing your story. I wanted to say, as you were saying that, you've been kind enough and talked with me in the past. I've had 3 books that didn't sell. The current one I'm trying to sell is book 4. And, you just keep doing it because it's what you're supposed to do. And you hope that one's going to be the one to sell. If not, you write the next one. So I want to kind of take it a little bit of a different direction. So we talked a little bit about your experience just in answering some of the questions. So you had your experience in the military, piloting Apache helicopters that don't fly 30,000 feet. You were also an FBI agent, and you've also worked with SWAT. So can you kind of tell us, there are elements in those 3 careers, you could say, how did they make that into Matt Drake? What parts of those experiences you've had became, your protagonist for Without Sanction?
So I guess the easiest one to answer is, like I said before, is Matt being a case officer, and that it's a really interesting vocation, because you're at its heart, what you're trying to do is get somebody to become a traitor, right? For lack of a better term, whether that's someone you want to give information about their own government, someone to give information about the gang they're in or the criminal organization, is that you're trying to get somebody to do something against their best interests. And the way that you're doing that is you're building a relationship with them, and it doesn't work, or it doesn't work well, unless you genuinely care about that person, right? As part of it. But you're going to genuinely care about them and build a relationship, and then go ask them to do something that could very likely have adverse effects for them, right? And so there was just a ton of stuff in there from a story perspective that I could use with Matt. From an Army perspective, one of the things I loved about Tom Clancy, specifically Red Storm Rising, or back in the day it was Harold Coyle with Team Yankee, or Larry Bond with Red Phoenix, where all these huge force on force, and now Mark Graney and Rip Rawlings have kind of given rebirth to that with Red Metal, is this idea of seeing a battle or seeing an engagement from multiple different points of view and what that looks like and stuff. And so I had a little bit, even though Matt is a first person protagonist, there's, some scenes at the end that bring in other elements of the Army or other elements of the military. And to me, that's just a lot of fun. It's hopefully intrinsic to the story, but it gives people a window into something that the average person maybe is never going to see. The average person's never going to see, what it's like to call gunships onto a target, or to, fly 50 feet off the ground and try and hit a point in space at plus or minus 30 seconds after a 2-hour flight, or things like that. And I feel like some of the escapism, one of the things I think that makes this genre unique and why it's so male dominated from a readership perspective, is that you're giving guys the ability to do something they've always wanted to do and couldn't, right? Who wouldn't want to be a Navy SEAL for a day, or a Green Beret for a day, or an Apache helicopter pilot or something? And so certainly from that aspect, I brought that in. From a SWAT perspective, I'm not a gun guy. I was the guy on the SWAT team where, first of all, I was a very junior member of the SWAT team. I was only on the team for a little less than a year before I left the FBI, where here's your pistol, here's your rifle, here's your sight on it, go do good things. And so I wasn't the guy I'm not the guy that you want to talk to. Josh Hood is the guy you want to talk to about what is the difference between a Creedmoor round and something. And like, here's your Glock, go take that. So,
Wait, you were the guy holding the shield.
I was the guy holding
Sandbag,
the shield.
man.
He was the guy Josh said, go up to that door. I'll be behind you. Don't worry.
We're going to the more senior guys. Here's your loaded magazine. Would you like me to load another for you? So what that comes back to is like, Matt is not a gun guy. Like, I don't spend a lot of time with that. What I have done, or what's been so helpful to me in my time since the FBI, is my friends or coworkers from the special operations community. So in the Without Sanction, there's a big hey-ho scene. And that was another thing. I was like, that's just stinking cool. Like, I want to show it because it's cool, and I'll figure out how it applies to the storyline and stuff. I just think that's cool. And so I have a very close friend who's a retired sergeant major from Delta Force who was a hey-ho qualified guy. And I was like, read this. What else do I need to do? And he would give me, first of all, he would beat me about the head and shoulders for all the stupid things I'd done. And most of them I would correct, and he would point something out. And I'm like, I don't care. That's in because it's cool for the story.
It's cool.
So things like that have helped a lot. Another thing, like a central tenet to Without Sanction, is that stanza in the Ranger Creed that says, and I'm going to read it to make sure I don't butcher it here, but it's a stanza that says, surrender is not a Ranger word. I will never leave a fallen comrade to fall into the hands of the enemy, and under no circumstances will I ever embarrass my country. Like, every organization you are part of has a mission statement or a set of values or something. Like the Ranger Creed, and I didn't know this until I worked with a bunch of Rangers, like they live that. They make their daily decisions by this set of words. It's like an ethos to them. And that's another thing that, most people in America never see or never understand or never get what the difference is between that and my value statement at work that says, team, together, everyone achieves more, right? Because they're both just words, but one of those is something that guides your every decision that you so internalize that you repeat to yourself when you're on a ruck march and you're thinking about falling out and or when you're and that was something I would have never known had I not had the opportunity to have those guys as friends and coworkers.
Yeah.
Super cool. But listen, speaking of experiences real quick, I'm curious. The Bureau usually likes to hire CPAs or lawyers, stuff like that.
Yes.
Not necessarily Apache pilots. So how'd you become a G-man?
That's funny because there was in my Quantico chat class, we were positively lousy with lawyers. I think we had 6 of them or 7 of them or something. So the FBI, and I don't know if the Secret Service has this or not, but the FBI at the time, this was back in 2010, I think. Yeah. There were so many folks coming out of the military with combat experience that the FBI had this program called the Tactical Recruiting Program, where they were specifically looking for folks who were more folks who had like special operations experience and stuff like that, because they were establishing a pipeline or wanted to establish a pipeline for HRT. So for folks that would come do it. I'm definitely and never was nor am still qualified for that. But HRT also has its own aviation unit. And so they were looking for folks who had combat experience that were pilots too. And I was at the time, like when I left the military after 10 years, I went and took a job in corporate America. And like most veterans, you don't realize while you're in the service how much of who you are is tied up into what you do until you leave that and you're no longer an Apache pilot or no longer fill in the blank. And then you're sitting in a cubicle and 3 cubicle rows over. Like I went to high school with that dude's daughter. So in 20 years, I could move from this cubicle to that cubicle. And that was my future. And it was terrifying. And it's, I went home and I told my wife, like, I didn't understand all the jokes in the movie Office Space until now. And now it's my life. And so it was very fortunate that at the time, that's who the FBI was recruiting. And so I went in under the tactical recruiting program, and then went to Dallas and actually was stationed there and never did go assess for the FBI HRT aviation unit, which they were rather unhappy about, but I was having a pretty good time being in Dallas and being a SWAT guy and doing all that fun stuff.
Right,
It's funny because in fact, now I think the recruiter will send you, if you come in under that program, you can't assess for HRT until you've been at your first duty assignment or first field office for, I think it's 2 years or something. He sends you to the crappiest field office, like Alaska or something like that. So you can't wait to assess for HRT and get out of there. So that's kind of the career.
Working hard for it.
Yeah. And I know you don't say this, Chris, but the Secret Service does an incredible job too. Like as a SWAT guy, one of your additional duties is personal protection. And we don't do it nearly as well as Secret Service, who does it all the time. But there were 2 different occasions where it was Attorney General Holder once flew down and we were augmented as detail. And then can't remember who the second one is, came down, and there were Secret Service guys with them both times who they'd kind of take us and say, all right, you stand there. Here's what you're looking for. We've got the important stuff. And I was like, so I just, and he's like, stand there. And, look, and it was like at a college campus. And this was the hysterical part. This kid came up to me as I'm standing there in my tough guy pose. And he's like, I can feel your energy. I don't know what that means, but I think I'm doing the job. So Chris, I can feel your energy, man.
Well, hopefully you got out of the FBI with your stapler. Yeah. So one of the strengths of Without Sanction for me was the humanity of Matt Drake. He's not some Superman who bounces back from every bit of action without a scratch or a hint of damage. We recently spoke with Josh Hood, who's also a veteran, about the same facet of his character.
Mm-hmm.
And do you think that tendency in your writing is due to the fact that you've lived some of it and you've witnessed even more of it?
I think some of it has. I think definitely that part of that is true. I think the other part is there's a book called Story Trump Structure that Stephen James wrote that's really good, that talks about, from a writing process, how do you always increase tension and always raise the stakes with your protagonist and always make things more difficult. And so one of the ways for me is I did it, part of it's realism. Part of it though is it's a really fine line that you're walking, because the reader knows everything about this is over the top, right? So again, going back to the hey-ho scene with Matt, my Delta Force friends, like, we would never hey-ho one guy in again. I'm like, yes, but in Matt's world, it happens, right? And so that there are things that are happening over the top, but at the same point, it has to feel real, and it has to feel, so I write in a first person protagonist. So you could look at the beginning and say it's first person. It won't be much of a story if Matt dies partway through this book, right? And so the reader knows that, but you're thinking, so how do you keep the reader on edge and keep the stakes for Matt high enough that the reader's like, holy crap, like, what is going to happen next? What else is going to happen to this guy? What is it? And that's part of it. I think from a military perspective, certainly there's that phrase that we throw around that says no plan ever survives first contact with the enemy, right?
Mm-hmm.
Nothing ever goes the way you expect it to go. And that can take, all kinds of different forms. And for me, what I tried to do over and over again is, how do I make things harder for Matt? How do I increase the stakes? How do I raise tension? And how do I still try and keep it believable at the same time? And it's a hard thing to do. There was a lot, like the final book, I think was, 96 or 97,000 words. I think at one point I had a rough draft that was upwards of 130 or 140,000 words.
Oh, nice job there, Mark Rainey.
Crazy. Yeah, I know, but Mark Rainey actually puts it all in the book. I look at it like, this is trash, this is trash, this is trash. But part of that is things that go nowhere, right? Or you write yourself out and you're like, all right, so now I've handcuffed and blindfolded him, thrown him in a box in the river, and he's not getting out of that. There's no way I can solve that problem. So I need to backtrack from there. And so it ends up being a lot of rewriting that you have to do, but hopefully at the end, you're walking that line, whereas you're a reader, you're like, in your head, you know he can't die, but you're like, holy crap, man, maybe he'll get right to the edge, or maybe he won't be able to do what happens next, or I don't know. And I think that's the most you can hope for.
Yeah. So you kind of alluded already to how you met Tom Colgan and what influence he's had on you. You know, a lot of viewers and us included are always curious as how you land an agent. And so you're with the amazing Barbara Powell.
Well, yep.
And so can you describe briefly kind of how you two came together to form that relationship?
So she hates it when I tell this story.
But we'll tell it anyway.
Excellent.
This is great.
My first or second Thriller Fest. So one of my best friends is a guy named John Dixon, and he and I were critique partners in grad school. And he wrote a couple of books, two of them in a series. One was called Phoenix Island. The next one was called can't remember the next one, but he's written another one called The Point. And he was kind of also the Nick Petrie role for me, kind of the older brother. Hey, this is what you do. And so he had come to Thriller Fest a number of times, and his debut, so Phoenix Island, sold, and they made a TV show about it. And so it was unfortunately a short-lived TV show that had nothing to do with the book, but Josh Holloway, it was called Intelligence. Josh Holloway was in it and stuff. And so he had hit the big time, and he's like, and he got his agent at Thriller Fest, at Pitch Fest. And he's like, you need to come to Pitch Fest. You need to, and we were roommates. And so literally the night before Pitch Fest till 3 a.m, he's like, what's your pitch? And I and he's like, no, you did this. Give me your pitch again. And I'm like, and so till 3 a.m. or something, I'm practicing pitches. And I knew Barbara was one of the agents I wanted to talk to. So I think she was my second or third. And so I sat down in front of her and was pretty nervous and stuff. And I said, and I had some kind of cool segue about how I was an FBI agent and I'd done this. And she's like, stop. And she's like, did you just say you were an FBI agent? And I said, yeah, I was. I've been out for about 2 years now. And she's like, I thought you were some kind of stoner surfer dude. And
like undercover.
I was not that. And so that was
Matthew McConaughey,
my agent. And so she's like, send me your book. So I sent it to her and she rejected it. And it was, my heart was crushed, I tell you. But
yes. How could she?
I know. After calling me a stoner surfer dude too, more or less. But she gave excellent feedback, and I knew who some of her customers were. And so the next Thriller Fest, I sulked for an appropriate period of time, pitched the book again the next Thriller Fest, met her again briefly, talked to her a little bit, and there weren't any takers on that book the second time around. So the third time around, I said, hey, I'm partly through with this book. Do you want to get coffee or something beforehand? And she's like, sure. And so we sat down and talked for a couple hours one night about what I was working on life and stuff like that. And so I got to know her over 4 or 5 years as a person. And then I met Nick Petrie is one of her clients. Bill Schweigart is another fantastic writer. He has a horror series. The first book is called Beast of Barcroft, and then he's doing some really cool work now that I don't think I can talk about, but you'll see his name shortly, so I'll talk about it a little bit. But I got to know her and know her clients and hang out with her. And so when the last Thriller Fest, when I was almost done with the book, but not quite, I said, hey, I am going to send this book out again, and I'm going to send it to you first because I've gotten to know you for the last 4 years. I know your clients. She'd invited me to the cocktail party a couple of times. I'm like, you are my number one draft pick. So I'm going to send this to you first, and then we'll go from there. And so it was actually good, but kind of kind of scary at the same time because we had developed a friendship by then. And if, what if she doesn't like it, or what if she likes it? And I actually even sent her an email when I sent her the query with the book. I was like, look, I value our friendship. If you don't like this book, please don't take it because we're friends and stuff. And Barbara being, Barbara again, was like, Bentley, I would never take a book I don't think I could sell. We can be friends and drink beers, but this is business.
It's business.
Business.
And so I only sent it to her, and she came back within a week and took it, and then she sold it like 8 days later. And so
Nice.
that had been, but it all started with Thriller Fest. It all started with Pitch Fest, and then started, I think, like I said, because we had a relationship, and I knew I had 2 agents before. I knew what I was looking for in an agent, and she knew enough about me that it worked out well.
Good partnership.
Your new Crew Reviews pledge name is Bodie.
So
Nice.
yeah, but to get there, you actually you have to write. You have to write good. I know you said you wrote several books prior to Without Sanction, and so but the writing process, in the military and in law enforcement, it's vastly different than writing fiction. You're not going to find beautiful prose and FBI 302s, the investigative reports and stuff.
Taken out, like they're brutal. Yeah.
Dude, and so listen, I've spent 20 years in law enforcement, so I did a lot of creative writing prior, and I still did some while I was in law enforcement. But it's almost, you have to rewire the brain, and I was wondering if you had some issues with that.
Yeah, I did. So I had my training agent. He and Barbara would have gone along well because he was very direct and would beat me about the head and shoulders, usually using curse words after he'd got to know me for the first week or so. And so for you guys that don't know, so a 302 is the painful, every time you do an interview, every time you do something, you have to write it up in a 302. And it is the driest, most boring, like passive voice kind of horrible thing. And when I first started doing it with him, he would just give me back the 302's red line. He's like, this is fluff, take this out, curse word, your mother should be ashamed of you kind of thing. And it definitely was like you had to, and even when I was working as a human guy, when you write up source reports, and this is better, I think, than 302s, because you're almost working as a journalist at that point, from the standpoint of you're trying to take this stuff that you got from a source that you probably weren't taking notes at the time because it was a meeting in a car or in an alley some way or something like that. And so you're trying to remember all this and then craft a story around it that drives home that this is why what I just learned is important, right? And so even that, like taking that to writing fiction, it definitely is a switch that you have to turn. And what I try and do, and this is the one of the rules on writing that people very good at this craft will beat up and down, is you have to read. And so what I would do, I think, to kind of flip that switch, and honestly, like what I do now is read exceptional books. Like you read Daniel Silva, and this is something that I learned how to do a little bit better in my MFA program, was doing close reading, right? So you read it and you read the chapter of the book and you're like, hey, that's a fantastic story. And then you go back and you're like, how did he distinguish this character from anybody else? And you read that description that he used again, or you're like, I didn't see that plot twist coming. How did he link these things together? And you go back and read more with your craftsman eyes for how did he do this thing that got me really excited. And so that, I think, helped me, or helps you, flip the switch between writing 302s or source reports, or frankly, anything that you're doing in the real job that's boring, to how do you write in a compelling way that fits. And I think you have to constantly be putting in your head the writers that you want to be like, the writers that are knocking it out of the park, the writers that are doing that amazing thing, because that's lodging in your subconscious, and hopefully some of that comes out when you write, I guess.
Yeah.
So we're actually debuting a new feature of the Crew Reviews for your show. We have some dedicated viewers who have sent in some questions. I have the first one. It's from a Joshua in Memphis, and he says, "What was more exciting, getting published or the last time McDonald's announced the McRib was back?"
I do like the McRib, so I don't. Would Josh from Memphis have a last name that starts with Hood? Maybe I don't know.
Perhaps I think.
I don't think it said.
It says Josh H.
Yeah, Joshua H from Memphis.
I don't know if I can answer that because it's the McRib. I will say that what's been cool about the whole thing, and again, hopefully y'all don't need 17 years and all the other crazy stuff, is that it's when I started doing this, my kids were really, really little, and they're now 18, 16, and 13. And what has been cool about it is that they have watched Dad really, really want something and fail, and really, really want something and fail, and really, really want something. And now, just like what we talked about before, you can be on Twitter and see the magic person with the 3-book deal, or you can in real life see kind of that arc. And that has been really cool. Like getting published, doing that has been pretty awesome. It's been pretty awesome, for the kids to be able to see that. The other thing I'll say too is that having it taken this long, and especially the last 6 or 7 years where you're in the community stuff, is you learn not to take any of this for granted, right? That the only thing I know for sure is that I have this book that's coming out right now. And that if that were the last of it and it never happened, that's still a pretty freaking cool thing. And I should be grateful for that, because you're really not guaranteed anything else beyond that.
Yeah, it's so true. It's the entertainment business.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
But here's the real question from Josh Hood.
He did have a real question.
He goes, he wanted to know, why did you choose first person for Without Sanction? This is from him. And do you now wish you had chosen third person?
No, so I don't. I'm going to interpret that to mean that Josh was stunned by my first person protagonist, not.
You beat him to it.
Well, and you should have written it in third person. It kind of goes back to like what I said, where writing is a crazy thing, right? Because there's definitely an art aspect to it, but there's also a blue collar work. Like, this is something I have to do. And so again, if you look at kind of that Venn diagram of here's the art stuff, here's the I'm going to be an amazing writer, and then the other Venn diagram of here's the stuff that I know genre fiction is selling and where I want to be. And then there's that overlap that's what can I bring that's unique to this genre that's already selling. And so I chose first person because I thought it would make my books a little bit different, because the thing there are some incredible writers. There's some incredible writers that are ninjas that are like, I'm not a ninja. I'm not, I can't write like Nick Petrie does. That dude's amazing. But I thought, like, what can I bring that's unique? And that first person kind of witty, going back to that revelation I had with my wife saying, you know what, if Nelson DeMille wrote a grocery list in first person, I would read that grocery list because it's funny. And so as I went, like, my first 2 books were standard third person protagonists. My third book is the first one I was like, that's the one I had to write for my thesis novel for my MFA program. I was like, I'm going to try something crazy and write first person. And I really liked it. And even though the book didn't sell, it gave me Matt's voice. And that was part of what hopefully is somewhat compelling for it. And it's funny because if you look at the opening, or the, I don't know what this is called, the exchange between Don Bentley and Tom Colgan, his editor, that's at the beginning of the arc. Like, Tom's like, hey, I got this idea. Like, instead of me writing about just the book, like, what if we did an interview and you could talk about stuff when we went back and forth? And so in my head, I was like, what if I did it, not completely in Matt's voice, but tried to use that same tone for it, so people know, like, this is what makes this book different from anything else. So you can tell Josh that I'm freaking proud I did first person. And
there you go, dude. There you go.
You're actually telling Josh that right now.
You just told him.
We have one more viewer question, and that I think Eric Bishop has this one.
Yeah, I've got this one. So yeah, we put this out here today, and we have a Twitter question for you from Nathan Nance. And it's a pretty good question. We like this one and thought you might have a good answer for it. So if you were forced to write a book where James Bond died, how would you kill him?
And be the pariah of everyone.
Nothing like on the spot question like
Is
that.
it Sean Connery or Daniel Craig?
Sean Connery never dies, so
Well, obviously you got to kill him.
He never dies. I think he would. And I don't have a good answer for this. I feel like he has faced death in every. I think it would have to be something mundane, like he had a heart attack and just dropped dead. Bam!
Slipped on the steps.
I was going to say.
Like, what else do you do with that dude? He's faced down death in every way imaginable. I think when he goes, it's like his heart just gets tired of being here, and he's like,
he's shoveling his driveway and has a heart attack.
Shoveling his driveway.
Like Capone, it could be syphilis.
Jeez,
that makes sense.
And that, folks, is the end of the normal, I guess, questions. And now we're going to go into our favorite part. May not be your favorite part after these questions. The lightning round. They're going to come fast and furious, and they're going to be somewhat ridiculous. But you have to answer them. So,
you have a choice.
All right.
So here, I'm going to start first. Do you know how and why the FBI was created?
Oh, man. They were created because obviously the Secret Service was not going to get the job done.
Brilliant.
Awesome. Yes.
Brilliant.
No,
But
I think it was, I know it had something to do with Prohibition and all of it. I mean, it was created to be America's heroes. That's why.
Okay. I will take, Don, I will take that as an answer. Also, the American Heroes thing, because they were Secret Service agents who started the FBI.
Yeah.
So you needed some real heroes in there. So
Yeah.
anyway. Next question. Hopefully you can answer this one for some of our viewers and past guests. What country eats the most donuts?
America.
Wrong.
Eats the most donuts because, I mean, it's apple pie, ice cream, donuts, and Kobe beef. That's what we do.
Our neighbors to the north would disagree, and so does worldatlas.com. They took a survey, and it's Canada. The Canadians eat the most donuts.
What do you do in the wintertime up there anyway, right? So,
You fly to the Bahamas.
yeah.
And so my next question, Don, the crew, we did a segment a couple of weeks past about one of the what was the greatest car chase in movie history. I picked Cannonball Run, and no one else agreed with me. What do you think is the greatest car chase?
I think it has to be from the Steve McQueen movie.
Yeah.
Bullet.
And
That's it.
Is it
See?
like Bullet or something like
Yeah.
that?
Yeah. See, Don Bentley knows exactly what he's talking about. That was my choice.
We actually voted. We did a democratic process. We voted it, and we said Ronin.
Yeah.
So that was a good one. My next question: what was the last book you read?
It was Locked On by Mark Graney.
Oh,
So that was an early Mark Graney.
yeah.
Mark Graney writing as Mark has written everything for everybody, but this was a Jack Ryan Jr. novel.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
The guy is
I
phenomenal.
got it right there.
He's the I can't remember if Josh introduced him this way or something. Josh said Mark Graney is the nicest guy in publishing, which is true, but I think he might also be the hardest working guy in publishing.
Yeah.
He's up there for damn sure.
Mm-hmm.
So my last question for you, Don, is that my kid is doing planets right now, and they're studying planets in fourth grade. And so he wanted me to ask this question. Do you think Pluto is a planet?
Absolutely, Pluto is a planet.
Yeah, there you go, people.
There you go.
You heard it
I'll tell
first.
my kid.
Pluto is definitely a planet.
All right, looks like I'm up here. The first time you saw warning lights in the cockpit, how many diamonds shot out of your ass?
Too many to count. It's so the longbow. We were the first longbows in Afghanistan, and the longbows a digital helicopter. And so it would when you would bring on the APU, the auxiliary power unit, and the computers would come on and you'd go through the pre-flight or the pre-flight checklist. Took a long time because there are all kinds of crazy systems, and it was notorious in the beginning for coming up with fake warning lights and stuff. And believe it or not, there was actually a version of Control-Alt-Delete that you would put cycle the computer.
Wing function.
The warning light would still be there. And then
Shut up, cockpit.
yes, and she'd talk to you too. And so it would, when there was a warning, you would get this voice in your ear that was telling you what was wrong. It was lovely.
What are you doing, Dave? All right, question 2. Is there any truth to Josh Hood's claim that you know nothing regarding barbecue and are likely a vegan?
Josh is uniquely handicapped because he is from Memphis, and he has, and they do pretty good barbecue in Memphis, but he is missing an entire food group called brisket, and he does not understand.
Oh, that's so true.
How to actually smoke. So in Memphis, they do some barbecue. It's okay. But if you do not have brisket, I ask you, is it even barbecue? And that's what you can tell Mr. Hood.
Okay. You'll have to watch that episode. It's great. All right. Number 3. When you had dinner at Brad Taylor's house, what was the body cavity search like? Was it gentle, a little rough?
There was definitely Taylor security there that you just, I don't think Brad even needs security. It's just in his like, he looks at you. It was like my first polygraph. Yes, fifth grade, I cheated on that test. I did. Chris, you feel my pain right now, don't you?
No, dude. No.
And Mike too, I imagine.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
All right. So number 4. So you and Chris Howdy have 2 of the most anticipated debut books in 2020. How much do you offer me for the compromising pics I may or may not possess of him?
I would give you all of the brisket you can eat. And
He knows exactly what's in my heart right there. All right.
But you know what? Even though Chris Howdy is a good dude, he is a really good dude and really talented writer. That's been one of the funnest parts, and we talked about that before, is just connecting with other writers.
It's so true. All right, number 5. Why did you use my image on your book cover without asking permission?
I didn't know you were going to catch that. Like it is.
I'm everywhere, baby.
Nobody who knows him thought we would catch that.
We actually went like
for good reason.
Wait, who's on the cover?
The Berkeley folks are phenomenal, and there were several variations of that cover, and when they showed that one, I was like, that's the one. Like that guy, I want to be that guy. And Barbara was like, I want to marry that guy.
Or at least get to know him better.
That's awesome.
All right, I'm out.
Okay, I think I'm up. So, Mr. Don, the best place in Austin to get a street taco would be where?
That's a good question. So, Torchy's Tacos.
Yep, those are good.
Amazing. If you go down to, let's see, Rainy Street has a couple great places too, but there's a place that we always have people from out of town come called Gordo's, and it's right by, I forget the street, but it's right by the Austin School for the Deaf. And so Gordo's is a food truck that has gourmet donuts. So everything starts with a donut, and then like the Elvis has caramelized bananas and peanut butter and bacon and stuff.
Oh man.
You can go to Gordo's first and eat the donut, and then they have a couple, there's a Torchy's and there's something else.
It's an insulin clinic right next to that.
Or you can go, or you can do the tacos, but Gordo's must be done as part of that.
Nice.
We should have done this interview live in Austin. I don't know why we're doing this remotely. I'm hungry now.
Change your world. Chorizo, life-changing. Life-changing.
So my second question is, how many times did you almost die or shoot the wrong person while in Hogan's Alley?
Oh my gosh, I died so many times.
Me too.
It's funny. I'm sure Chris is the same way for you guys at FLETC, but when you leave, like when you're by the time you're doing your last mission or whatever it is in Hogan's Alley, like you got the jitters and they're constantly like some dude comes out of a house and you're like, who's that? He's gonna kill me. And some guy over here, and it's not. It's like in some ways you feel when you graduate from the academy the most prepared you could ever be, and in other ways you fare the least prepared because you've been humiliated and died over
So
and
many times.
Well, I always had the problem. Don, I don't know if you had the problem with it because they would always wear the masks and you couldn't hear what they were saying if they were a little bit like too far away. And you're like, I don't know what you're saying. I don't know what you're saying. And then they would just shoot you. And you're like, yeah, son of a bitch.
it was horrible. And it's not just, obviously I was an Apache pilot, so I didn't have a whole lot of experience cleaning rooms, but the guy in the FBI Academy, they seat you by rows, like in the big auditorium, and then you're always broken down by your rows. So you get to be really, really good friends. So the guy sat next to me was a Green Beret, and he got his butt handed to him every day in Hogan.
Wow.
I feel so bad as an Apache pilot.
That makes
That'd
you
be
feel
an
better.
ego killer, man.
So J. Edgar Hoover was rumored to have files on just about everybody. However, I want to know who Tom Colgan has files on.
Mm.
That's a good question.
Not us. Not us.
I hope.
Tom needs them because I get more and more people ask me what's he's like. And the amazing thing about Tom is he's the exact same person on Twitter as he is in real life. And so you talk to him on Twitter, that kind of self-depreciating, that's what he's like in real life. And I think he would be a good case officer because he just crawls into your head and grabs hold of that.
You just let him in because he's so
Yeah,
nice.
Yeah, he doesn't need files. He just
Yeah.
roots around in your brain.
How many times did he spill water on your manuscript?
Or coffee.
Or coffee?
So you get to choose your thrill. Do you want a static jump or would you like to swim with sharks, but there's no cage?
I am terrified of heights, and this causes.
You're a helicopter
At least you
pilot.
flew helicopters then. I mean, this makes logical sense.
Low in the trees. When you get up high, we have no business being up high. That can happen to a helicopter pilot up there. So when
Did you have like the horse blinders that were just on the low part? So you were up high?
I'm in with my wife when we were stationed in Korea, and I went up the wall first, and I don't know, we were maybe 70 feet up, maybe not even that high. And I'm like, don't come up here. Don't. This horse scampers up and like swats me on the butt and then so I would probably rather swim with sharks than static jump. So, yeah.
Wow.
So you get to spend one full day with an author who's passed on. Who's the one author you'd like to spend a day with that's not with us anymore?
That's a good question. I should probably say something totally literary, but honestly, probably Tom Clancy. Like he had, like I said, such a big impact on me as a reader.
Mm-hmm.
And, to work with guys or to know guys like Mark Graney who knew him or wrote with him, or Tom Colgan who was his editor. I'd love to just have a beer with him.
Yeah.
Good answer.
Well, you're almost out of the woods, but you have me left.
Here we go.
So the first one's actually relatively serious. What investigation from the annals of the FBI would you have wanted to work?
There were a lot of people who did amazing work right after September 11th, like amazing work that started from zero. Like one of the books so when I was working human stuff, I worked a bunch of different areas. And for anybody in the Dallas office, for anybody who wanted to work counterterrorism, they would recommend you read The Leaning Tower. And if you've never read that, it's kind of the history of radicalization all the way up through September 11th. And there were just across law enforcement, federal law enforcement, local law enforcement, they were just, imagine from September 10th, there was one or two guys who were trumpeting what Al-Qaeda was and what the threat of Osama bin Laden was, and everybody else, the FBI specifically, was still mainly a criminal organization or criminal organization then. And in 24 hours, you have to shift to a completely new threat, a completely new, I don't even know if there was a counterterrorism branch back there or specialty back there. And so those days after that, I think would have been pretty amazing to have been a part of.
Awesome. What is the most terrifying single moment of your life thus far?
Other than this interview?
Self-evident.
It's funny. I think in Afghanistan, I didn't get shot at very many times, and and when it happens, it's terrifying at first, and then very quickly. One of the things that why and Chris, probably Mike, can both attest to this, is why you train so much is what you're trying to do is put yourself in a position that when this event happens, there's something that reminds you of your training, and you transition to that training without really thinking about it. And so for us, when you're in the simulator and you practice all the time, when you're getting shot at, your opposite seater, or whoever says it, he or she says, we're taking fire. And that is the start of the battle drill. We're taking fire. And in Afghanistan, when we had the really bad day, it's for a while you're trying to come to terms with what's, the whole OODA loop thing, and coming to terms with what's actually happening. Yeah. And what made it better for me is when my front seater said we're taking fire, and then it felt familiar. And you're like, okay, I know what to do. We've done this before. Stuff. Probably the most terrifying part, we were the first longbows into Afghanistan, and the longbow is significantly heavier than the Alpha model by, I don't know, maybe 4,000 pounds. And we had the same engines as the Alpha model helicopter. And so what it meant in the summertime is that we were so power limited, we didn't even have power to hover in ground effect all the time. And so in flight school, when I was in flight school 20 something years ago, your instructors were Vietnam era pilots, and they would tell you stories about being so underpowered you had to choose between gas or bullets. Like, what do I want to take more of because I don't have enough power?
Jeez.
And you're like, whatever. And then there I was in Afghanistan, and like, take more gas or more bullets. And then when you would take off, so the way a helicopter takes off, when it's hovering, you get vortices over the rotor blades, and it dirties up the rotor blade. And so it takes more power to hover until you get through about 18 or 20 knots, because then the wind coming in blows those vortices off, and it cleans it up. And so you would literally have to bounce across the ground until you got to about 20 knots, hoping that you're going to get it before you hit the HESCO barrier at the other side.
Oh,
in fact, before you would fly each time, you would do this calculation that says, here's the amount of jettisonable weight I have, that if in emergency I can blow off the rocket pods, and I'll have I think it's 200 pounds equals 1% of torque. So I would have another 1 or 2% power. And so on really bad days, you would have your opposite crew member, your front seater, if you were a back seater, have his or her finger on the store's jettison button, and you're going and saying, if it looks like we're not going to make it, blow off the rocket pod so that we can get over the side of it. And there were far, far more time that I terrified myself just flying in the summertime than ever being shot.
You need 1% differential between making the air or not making the air. That's right. That's the
that is way more terrifying than mine. Mine involves Sister Neil and my third grade teacher. So my next question, in the movie Die Hard,
yep,
which Agent Johnson or Agent Johnson, is the more accurate portrayal of event?
Obviously, Agent Johnson is the more accurate portrayal.
Yeah, I would have gone the other way, but okay.
Mm-hmm.
Follow up to that question. Have you ever, when you were fed bureau, did you ever say to your wife, "You ask for a miracle, I give you the FBI"?
No, but I have convinced my wife it is the perfect Christmas movie, and so we did.
Yes, it is.
It is.
Absolutely.
Finally, we've rented it so many years in a row. This year, she's finally like, "Just buy it," and so we bought it. The kids have watched it, and
well, when you get your advance, you can afford things like that.
Exactly.
So what do you get with his advance? What a movie.
My last question, and I think you actually answered this earlier without even knowing it was my last question. Better helicopter, the one in Airwolf or Blue Thunder?
Airwolf all the way.
Yeah.
All the way. You got the turbo boost. You got the Hellfire missiles that drop out.
Yeah, absolutely.
Did the loops.
Do a loop.
And the music.
Yeah.
Hey, Blue Thunder had good music, Eric.
You would always
Airwolf, though. Come on.
If you had a compliant simulator person, you're like, "Hey, I want to try and do a loop." And they're like, "All right," and that is. It is possible to do in the Apache in the simulator, but you got to be pretty good. It never looked as good as it did in Airwolf, that's for sure.
Oh, man.
And,
it was 120 degrees in Airwolf when he was trying to do it.
There it is, folks. You, Don, Awesome.
Yeah,
Thank you for
guys.
showing up. Thanks for answering our serious questions and our silliest questions. Let's raise a glass to you, sir.
Without
Congrats
Sanction,
on an
baby.
awesome novel.
Thanks, man. I appreciate it, guys.
Get out there and buy
Congrats,
this
man.
book, people. It's amazing. It really is. And you can tell that he suffered many years to get to this point in his career.
Many years.
Thanks. See you, bud.
See you, buddy.
See ya.
And here we go. Outro for Don
3,
Bentley.
2, 1.
3, 2, 1. Hit it.
Take one. Thanks for sticking around for another fantastic interview. We want to thank Don Bentley for sitting down with us, talk about his military career, his time in the FBI, and his debut novel, Without Sanction, which hits bookshelves on March 3rd. You'll find a link to order it down below. Go ahead and click it. Trust me, you're going to love this book. And if you enjoyed this episode, please hit the thumbs up button down below and do us a favor and tell your friends and family about our show. We'll see you on the next great author interview on the Crew Reviews podcast. Boys, cheers.
I'm loving
Cheers.
life. Cheers.
Well done, you son of a bitch.
Damn
One
right.
to take Jake. There it is.